Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much to the band for that really wonderful performance. We will talk to you more in just a moment. Now, welcome to the first day of the Combating Racism and Antisemitism Together, Shaping an Omni-American Future event. A special collaboration of the American Sephardi Federation, the Jazz Leadership Project, and CAM, the Combat Antisemitism Movement, a nonpartisan network of individuals and NGOs building a grassroots movement of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and other faith-based and human rights groups united to defeat contemporary anti-Semitism. We're live on Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and if you miss anything, don't worry, you'll get an email recap and a recording of the full event will be available at event.omniamerican.org, as well as on CAM's social media channels. Thank you to Itamar Barachov and his jazz ensemble for that opening number. We'll be hearing much more from you guys later on. We will discover in the next 2 days stating what we are for is as crucial as saying what we are against. We are for human excellence and the power of culture to unite. That's why the work of Albert Murray, a great 20th century American writer on jazz, blues, and American culture, will be our main focus. With racism and anti-Semitism on the rise, now is the time to stand up and do your part in pushing back against bigotry. We hope this unique gathering will impress upon you the dire urgency of this mission and inspire you to join the Omni-American movement and take an active role in the collective effort to fight hatred and build a more harmonious society. In studio in Israel with us today, we have scholar, writer, and lecturer Aryeh Tepper, Director of Publications and Chief Editor at the American Sephardi Federation, and his fellow event organizer, writer, and educator Greg Thomas. The CEO of the Jazz Leadership Project will be with us the whole time from his home in the United States via Zoom. Hey, thank you so much for being with us. Now, partner organizations that helped make this event possible include the JCC Association of North America, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, Lantos Foundation, National Jazz Museum, Free Black Thought, Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and Jazzmobile, among others, of course. The broadcast of the second day of the event will begin at 6 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, so don't miss it. Now, without further ado, let's begin by hearing the words of Mr. Murray himself, as read by several leading voices for positive social change, writer and entrepreneur Chloe Valdery, and scholars Professor Sheena Mason and Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin. The following passages are from the Omni-Americans, Some Alternatives to the Folklore of White Supremacy, published in 1970.
Thanks, Lauren. As I relate on my website, theoryoфenchantment.com, I recently read The Omni-Americans by the brilliant Albert Murray. This was Murray's very first book, and in it he described the specific task of the artist, as discussed within Black American culture. He called this task impromptu heroism, which is the capacity to play with whatever life brings you, and in so doing, to become the stylizer, the organizer, or the being who brings meaning to chaos. This resonated deeply with me. When I read it, I realized that's what I've long been doing with my life, and that above all else, I am an artist. The following passage from the opening section of the Omni-Americans is striking. The section is titled, A Natural History, E Pluribus Unum. American culture, even in its most rigidly segregated precincts, is patently and irrevocably composite. It is, regardless of all the hysterical protestations of those who would have it otherwise, incontestably mulatto, which I take to mean mixed of various elements. Indeed, for all their traditional antagonisms and obvious differences, the so-called black and so-called white people of the United States resemble nobody else in the world so much as they resemble each other. And what is more, even their most extreme and violent polarities represent nothing so much as the natural history of pluralism in an open society. Now to you, Dr. Sheena.
Today I'll read a passage from the introduction of the Omni-Americans that aligns with my scholarship and enterprise, The Theory of Racelessness. Ultimately, in his work, it is an enterprise toward unity. He writes, quote, "The essays, commentaries, and reviews out of which the Omni-Americans has been built are all intended as counterstatements and restatements in the generic sense. Their most general significance should be suggested by the title, To race-oriented propagandists, whether white or Black, the title of course makes no sense. They would have things be otherwise. But the United States is in actuality not a nation of Black people and white people. It is a nation of multicolored people. There are white Americans, so to speak, and Black Americans, but any fool can see that the white people are not really white and that Black people are not Black. They are all interrelated one way or another. Thus, the title, The Omni-Americans, is among other things an attempt to restate the problem formulated by the report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, aka the Kerner Report, by suggesting that the present domestic conflict and upheaval grows out of the fact that in spite of their common destiny and deeper interests, the people of the United States are being misled by misinformation to insist on exaggerating their ethnic differences. The problem is not the existence of ethnic differences, as is so often assumed, but the intrusion of such differences into areas where they do not belong. Ethnic differences are the very essence of cultural diversity and national creativity, end quote. I'll happily pass the mic to Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin of Columbia University. Hi, Farah. I'm looking forward to reading your recently published book, Read Until You Understand the Profound Wisdom of Black Life and Literature.
Thank you so much, Sheena. Thank you very much. And thank you for all your work in this area. I've learned a great deal from you. The two passages we've heard involve the fallacy of racial thinking. The passage I'll read from the section titled The Blues, Idiom, and the Mainstream is a beautiful sketch of Albert Murray's artistic and aesthetic ideas, which he extended and elaborated later in such works as The Hero in the Blues and The Blue Devils of Nada. I'm going to take poetic license with the gender designation of parts of what follows, just as female jazz singers often do when adjusting the language of classic tunes in the American Songbook. The section begins, the creation of an art style is, as most anthropologists would no doubt agree, a major cultural achievement. In fact, it is perhaps the highest as well as the most comprehensive fulfillment of culture. For an art style, after all, reflects nothing so much as the ultimate synthesis and refinement of a lifestyle. Art is by definition a process of stylization, and what it stylizes is experience. What it objectifies, embodies, abstracts, expresses, and symbolizes is a sense of life. Accordingly, what is represented in the music, dance, painting, sculpture, literature, and architecture of a given group of people in a particular time, place, and circumstance is a conception of the essential nature and purpose of human existence itself. More specifically, an art style is the assimilation in terms of which a given community, folk, or communion of faith embodies its basic attitudes toward experience. A few pages later, Murray continues, as an art form, the blues idiom is by its very nature goes beyond the objective of making human existence bearable physically or psychologically. The most elementary and hence the least dispensable objective of all serious artistic expression, whether aboriginal or sophisticated, is to make human existence meaningful. The blues are part of this effort. The definitive statement of the epistemological assumptions that underlie the blues idiom may well be the colloquial title and opening of the declaration of one of Duke Ellington's best-known dance tunes from the mid-30s. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. In any case, when the Negro musician or dancer swings the blues, she is fulfilling the same fundamental existential requirement that determines the mission of the poet, the priest, and the medicine man. She is making an affirmative and hence exemplary and heroic response to that which André Malraux describes as la condition humaine. Extemporizing in response to the exigencies of the situation in which she finds herself, she is confronting, acknowledging, and contending with the infernal absurdities and ever-impending frustrations inherent in the nature of all existence by playing with the possibilities that are also there. Thus, does man the player become man the stylizer, and by the same token, the humanizer of chaos. And thus does play become ritual, ceremony, and art. And thus also does the dance beat improvisation of experience in the blues idiom become survival technique, aesthetic equipment for living, and a central element in the dynamics of U.S. Negro lifestyle. When the typical Negro dance orchestra plays the blues, it is also playing with the blues. When it swings, jumps, hops, stomps, bounces, drags, shuffles, rocks, and so on, its manner not only represents a swinging the blues attitude toward the bad news that comes with the facts of life, it also exemplifies and generates a riffing the blues disposition toward the rough times that beset all human existence. And now I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
Those passages demonstrate Albert Murray's emphasis on art and culture over the fallacy of racial categorization and what today we call racial essentialism. Now we'll have opening remarks by Aryeh Tepper, followed by his colleague in putting together this event, Greg Thomas. Take it away, Aryeh.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, I'm Aryeh Tepper, and welcome to our event. We've come together tonight to strengthen the resilience of those who oppose racism and anti-Semitism, and we're going to do that by taking an enjoyable and stimulating ride through Albert Murray's wisdom and the Omni-American tradition of jazz music and thought. And I'll start with a story, an old story from the tradition, one of the tradition's first flowers, a story called Balna and Paul, written in 1918 by a 24-year-old man named Gene Toomer. Gene Toomer's ancestors were both so-called black and white people. In his day, Toomer was considered by American norms to be black simply, and anyone with sense could see that didn't make any sense. But an entire socio-economic order depended on that fiction, the fiction of race and racial essentialism, the notion that every individual can be reduced to a category based upon the color of their skin or their particular ancestry. But back in 1918, Toomer saw through that fiction, and in his story, Balna and Paul, Toomer imagines Balna and Paul living in Chicago as college classmates in the 19-teens. This was boomtown Chicago, the main destination in the Great Migration, when hundreds of thousands of so-called black Americans were heading north along the newly laid steel power of the American railways. If you're looking for a soundtrack, you can imagine Sidney Bechet, a sometime Chicago resident, playing the blues, the drummer slapping his brushes, easy, the rhythm of a railroad train coming down the railroad track. So, Balna and Paul go out on a date. Balna is a young white woman, and Paul is mixed race, ethnically ambiguous. He can pass for white, but people look at him funny. They go out on their date and people look at Paul's red, brown face. Toomer imagines people wondering, what is he? A Spaniard, an Indian, an Italian, a Mexican, a Hindu, or a Japanese? Paul's white friend, Art, barks back at the onlookers, like they did back in the 19-teens, calling them a goddamn pack of owl-hide hyenas. But Paul has an epiphany. He understands that people don't see him as he sees himself. And he also understands that his vision of the world is intensely real. Toomer writes, their stares giving him to himself filled something. There was fullness and strength and peace about it all. He saw himself cloudy, but real. Cloudy, as in mixed, but genuine. Paul, after he leaves the restaurant, shares his vision with the black doorman. I came to tell you, brother, that white faces are petals of roses, that dark faces are petals of dusk, and I'm going out to gather petals. Toomer shows us Paul returning the onlooker's gaze with a deeper vision, and his joy in discovering his mission to gather beauty, both light and dark. It's Chicago, 1918, and Gene Toomer's Paul just stomped the blues. Stomping the blues. That, says Albert Murray, is what we do whenever we overcome the power that aims to diminish our life and vitality. We stomp the blues, joyfully. Those people looking at Paul and trying to put him in a box were what Murray playfully called blue devils, blind to the beauty of his humanity. If it had been an episode of The Twilight Zone, They would have asked Paul if they can show him to his box, and they wouldn't have meant a box seat. Barna, she couldn't handle the complexity. And when Paul gets back to where they'd been standing, she's gone. Jean Toomer's story, Barna and Paul, helps us understand what's at stake. Still, 103 years after Toomer wrote his story, it remains news. We are called upon to stomp the blues of race and racial essentialism like Paul did, without resentment, and to emerge from the struggle with an augmented sense of life. That's blues idiom wisdom. Yeah, it's easier to respond to bigotry by becoming resentful or closing your mind and talking like Archie Bunker, you goddamn pack of owl-eyed hyenas. But in order to remain open to the beauty and richness of human life, to absorb human excellence wherever it's found, there's no choice but to stomp the blues of racial essentialism, then to wait for them to return and to stomp them again and again, until you begin to see their existence as an opportunity to do your thing. Murray called that antagonistic cooperation. The blue devils, you see, make the hero. Just like in Toomer's story, the people trying to reduce Paul enabled him to expand his vision. So the next time you face a dragon, you can genuinely smile and say, I want to thank you for letting me be myself again. This special event dedicated to combating racism and anti-Semitism together and shaping an Omni-American future will take us on a journey through the thought and spirit of the man who taught us the meaning of stomping the blues, Albert Murray. Along the way, we'll enjoy world-class jazz and hear from an all-star lineup of fascinating contemporary writers, scholars, activists, and musical artists. Together, we'll be interpreting, musically performing, commenting on, and exploring Albert Murray's vision of Omni-American culture and what my friend and partner Greg Thomas calls the blues idiom wisdom tradition, a vitally important tradition that generously shares its riches with anyone who genuinely listens. This event is dedicated to exploring and celebrating the blues idiom wisdom tradition. We hope you enjoy the ride. It's my pleasure to turn things over to my friend and partner in organizing this wonderful event, the wonderful Greg Thomas. Greg, please.
Thanks so much, RJ. Not only for mentioning my phrase, blues idiom wisdom tradition, in which Albert Murray, who coined the term blues idiom, is central, but for the many, many months of work that we put in together to make this event an actuality. Thanks too for the collaborative partnership of the American Sephardi Federation and the Combat Antisemitism Movement, and as well to all of the speakers participating in and partners promoting this event. Yes, the blues idiom wisdom tradition is key because in our polarized United States and world, we need leadership and wisdom to point the way through the complexity, through the darkness of bigotry and hatred to the generative light of shared understanding and civic values found in the Omni-American perspective. One way of describing this rooted and cosmopolitan point of view is what Murray might have called an, quote, extension, elaboration, and refinement of the very motto of the United States, e pluribus unum, out of one, many, which Chloe Valerie mentioned in her short reading from Murray's first book, The Omni-Americans. The Omni-Americans has had two different subtitles in its various printings since 1970. The first was, as you heard from Lauren, some alternatives to the folklore of white supremacy. The second was Black experience in American culture. Let's delve briefly into these subtitles and explore Murray's life and career simultaneously. In the first, unlike many today who intone white supremacy as an all-inclusive indictment, Murray's characterization made clear what that ideology actually is: folklore, a folk belief. In this case, a lying tradition of invidious customization of racist domination and exploitation, passed on from generation to generation. That belief system is still held by some today for sure. But if we look across American history, from indentured servitude of so-called whites and blacks to Bacon's Rebellion and the subsequent legalization of racialized groups to ensure that the planter class wouldn't face the kind of collaboration that this very event represents, the American Revolution and independence from the British monarchy, the Civil War and Reconstruction, and the Jim Crow period to now, in 2021, can we really say that white supremacy is as prevalent as in those days? I respectfully contend that nowhere near the amount of people today hold on to the folklore of white supremacy as part of their identities as when Murray was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1916 and adopted by Hugh and Mattie Murray, or when he was voted the best all-around student at the Mobile County Training School and awarded a tuition scholarship to attend Tuskegee Institute in 1935, where he graduated in 1939. Or when he married Moselle Menifee, who herself graduated from Tuskegee in 1943, the same year Murray enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces and that their one daughter, Michelle, was born. The folklore of white supremacy, truth be told, was far more prevalent when Murray re-encountered, in 1942, Ralph Ellison, who was an upperclassman at Tuskegee when Murray was an undergraduate. That year, they began a lifelong personal and literary friendship, which you can learn more about by checking out their collection of letters from 1950 to 1960, Trading 12s. In those days of social infamy, we were still, especially in the South, living under the thick racist heat of the Jim Crow regime, where Murray met his hero, Duke Ellington, in 1946, the same year he ended World War II active duty, transferred to the Air Force Reserve, and returned to Tuskegee to teach. Even during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s, where Black American and Jewish American collaboration for justice became a shining example for this very event, the folklore of white supremacy was more salient than now. That shining period is also when Murray began publishing fiction and nonfiction as a professional writer, which he devoted himself to full time after retiring with rank of major from the Air Force. Our event over the next 2 days focuses on the power of culture through intellectual, artistic, moral, and spiritual excellence. Our gathering together is a complement and continuation of what began in the Civil Rights Movement and even earlier in jazz, as we'll soon discuss. The second subtitle of the Omni-Americans, Black Experience in American Culture, alludes to the centrality of the experience of Black Americans to American culture, and for far more than our horrific experience of enslavement. In fact, if we combine the insights of Orlando Patterson in his magnificent work, Freedom in the Making of Western Culture, with the brilliance of political philosopher Danielle Allen in her book, Talking to Strangers, Anxieties of Citizenship Since Brown v. Board of Education, we can conclude that freedom in the West generally, and in America specifically, was the tragic central value and generative core that inspired the heroic sacrifice that Black Americans made and continue to make to ensure that we move closer to the realization of the principles in our creed. Patterson wrote that freedom constitutes for the West, quote, the germ of its genius and all its grandeur, and the source of much of its perfidy and crimes against humanity. With, we hope, nuance, precision, and deep feeling, we'll return to variations on these themes again and again as we endeavor to combat racism and anti-Semitism by shaping together an Omni-American future. Now, we began with some jazz, and we'll continue now with some more. But at first, I want to say that before the pandemic, on 2 occasions, I had the honor of giving presentations at APAC, one in New York, the other in Washington, D.C. The presentations were about Lionel Hampton's King David Suite and Hamp's relationship with the Jewish people. Itamar performed excerpts of Hampton's suite on both occasions. And it should be noted that Itamar was named the winner of the Letter One Rising Stars Jazz Award in February 2021, while in 2018, he received the American Sephardi Federation's Pomegranate Award for musical conservation, creativity, and coexistence. And my partner, Aryeh Tepper, wrote the liner notes to Itamar's second album, Boomerang.
Thank you so much, Greg. And now we are so happy to have Itamar Borochov and his jazz ensemble perform yet another number for us. Guys, take it away. Thank you guys once again for that performance. Now, so far, we've heard about relationships of people, ideas, and music as expressions of what Albert Murray called an Omni-American culture and identity. Now, Columbia University professor of literature, Robert G. O'Meally, the founder of the Center for Jazz Studies there, will share stories and lessons from his relationship with Murray.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here and to be part of a celebration of this man that I love so much and whose work I teach every year. And so thank you for the good work that's going on and for arranging for this celebration. Our struggles against prejudice, anti-Semitism, and anti-Black American behavior are two of the most famous struggles in the world. And we can model the opportunity to see one another as part of ourselves, as to offer hospitality to everyone in the world as one family. That's the Murray point of view. I met him in 1973 at a conference that perhaps you'll hear more about from Mr. Lou Jones. And at that time, he was talking about adoption. And that's part of what I want to say a word about today as I share a couple of personal stories. he said in a moment between sessions that he was adopted. It was my first meeting him, and he was telling me that he himself had been adopted, and that adoption became an important part of his philosophy. That adoption is from a Latin word meaning to choose. And the fact that his adoptive parents chose him was part of the enrichment for life as he viewed it. He had his birth parents, plus he had another set, so that he had a way of looking at everything in a positive light. But this idea of adoption was central to him. You could choose your own associates without regard to ethnicity or background. You could choose who you wanted. You could choose who you wanted as an artist. You could choose your ancestors. So he would often say that his uncle was Faulkner, that his aunt was Gertrude Stein, that Duke Ellington was part of his family because he had adopted them as part of his family. I was fortunate enough to be his driver when I first came to New York, and he found out I had a relatively new car. He would call me up, and that was the greatest thing in my life at that point. In the late 1970s, early 80s, I would drive him around, and he gave me lessons in clothing, lessons in cooking, lessons in books and music. And I realized that he had adopted me as one of his sons, and he was going to set me straight on any number of accounts. And I'm so much the richer for it. He believed in art. He believed that people live in terms of the art that's around them. And therefore, the jazz discussion is very pertinent. We all can be improvisers. We all can be individuals and have a strong voice. We all can be part of a band where we hear one another and respect one another and help them bring out their own individuality as we make up a band that's democratic together. So for me, it was very important that he heard a storyline in the music, that the singer of a song, even if it was a sad song, was the hero of that song, and that the hero's responsibility was to save the whole group. And that furthermore, the band was a democratic unit responsible for hearing one another and for making the whole band sound good. I want to finish what I have to say today with a personal anecdote concerning one of my sons. I was going over to Mr. Murray's house at 132nd Street, Lenox Avenue, Malcolm X Avenue, and I had to take my 4-year-old son with me. And I knew that Murray was not so at ease with having youngsters around his house. He had expensive paintings that came as far as the floor nearly, books all the way to the floor, and he was not easy. So he told me that when his friends came over with kids, he would jump until they came. He said, watch that, look, have you got, make sure you don't, hold on. He would make those kind of jumps until the person took that kid out of there, he told me. So I had that ringing in my head as I realized I had to bring my own son over, 4 years old. And so I told Gabe, look, you're gonna go here and I want you to be on your best behavior. Imagine you're at your grandfather's house where you know you have to just sit still and behave yourself and not cause any disturbance. And so Gabe was very good. He was like a soldier. He sat there. He was very good. And Mrs. Murray, we've heard about, had a beautiful sing-song voice. And she said, I know my boy would like to have some cake and come on in here and get a little something to drink. So she was wonderful with him and showed hospitality. If anybody could represent it, Mrs. Murray did. And eventually, after we did our business, Murray and I talking about whatever it was, we were ready to leave. And as we got to the doorway, Gabe pulled me down to him and said, Daddy, am I supposed to shake his hand? What should I say to this man? How can I say goodbye? And Murray said, what is all this secret talk going on about? And I said, well, honestly, he's not sure if he should shake your hand or hug you, or I told him to act as if he did at his grandfather's house, but he's not sure what to do now. And Murray said, well, if he's at his grandfather's house, son, come over here and give your granddaddy a big hug right now. And he hugged him tight. And the meaning of the word adoption really came through to me at that point. He treated my son, who he was seeing for the first time, as his own grandson, as he had treated me as his son. And part of his lesson there, of course, is that we can all rise above our racial and ethnic and class and age specificities and adopt people based on kinship that goes beyond those questions of color and other questions like that. If we can see one another's struggles as our own and reach out and greet one another in that way, Murray's message was, we can not only be Omni-Americans, but we can be world citizens, modeling what it means to be against Semitism, against anti-Semitism, and against racism at every single turn. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
A lot of really, really important points and lots of really colorful stories. So thank you for that. And also thank you for being a part of this event today. I wonder if you could sum up for us the importance of being a part of something like this today.
Well, it's a fantastic opportunity. I see my friends on the screen, and we're all in the Americans, I mean, and I know that like them, I'm very, very happy to be able to reach across this distance and to recognize our kinship together. That's what it means more than anything else. Our offering Mrs. Murray-like hospitality to one another, seeing the other person as part of who we are and saying, come on in, we're all in this thing together. That's the Murray spirit of things.
Wow, Aryeh, how lucky are we to have a live jazz band in the studio with us today?
Amazing, amazing.
All right, now I want to bring Greg Thomas back into the conversation. Greg, I understand you have an interesting story for us about Louis Armstrong, correct?
I certainly do. Louis Armstrong and the Star of David. How many folks know that Louis Armstrong, the father of jazz, wore a Star of David around his neck for most of his life? And I wonder why he did that. I think the answer is gratitude and appreciation. Because when Louis Armstrong was a young boy living with his grandmother in the 3rd Ward of New Orleans, he was shown warmth and kindness by a Jewish Lithuanian family, the Karnofskys. They hired young Louis at the age of 7 to help with their junk and coal business. As a laborer, he'd get up early to deliver coal from the top of a delivery wagon with one of the family's sons, Morris Karnofsky. In his biography, in his own words, Armstrong wrote, "Working for these fine people, I learned to be an early riser, just like them. I noticed they believed in being on the move," end quote. The Karnofskys, quote, "would start getting ready for work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was right there along with them, up every morning early, making hay while the sun shined," end of quote. So he also recalled that the Karnofsky boys, quote, "were all fine young men, wonderful dispositions. The whole family had that fine warmth for all their Negro help," end quote. At dinner time, Mrs. Karnofsky would invite the young Armstrong to have dinner with the family, and Armstrong developed a taste for Jewish food that continued many years later into his own home in Queens. Biographer and jazz critic Gary Giddens, in his book Satchmo, The Genius of Louis Armstrong, quotes Armstrong saying, quote, "I still eat their food, matzahs. My wife Lucille keeps them in her bread box." A sensitive soul, Armstrong noticed that many of the Jewish immigrants on the 400 block of South Rampart Street and beyond were mistreated by others who identified as white. Quote, "I had a long admiration for the Jewish people, especially for their long time of courage, taking so much abuse for so long," he wrote. But his reason for wearing the Star of David went beyond mutual sympathy and struggle. One day, Armstrong wrote, "When I was on the wagon with Morris Karnofsky, we were on Rampart and Perdido Streets, and we passed a pawn shop, which had in its window an old, tarnished, beat-up B-flat cornet. It cost only $5. Morris advanced me $2 on my salary. Then I put aside 50 cents each week from my small pay. Finally, the cornet was paid for in full. Boy, was I a happy kid. The Karnofskys encouraged him to play and also to sing as well. According to Armstrong, Esther Tilly Karnofsky, the mother of the home, often sang songs such as Russian lullabies. Quote, when I reached the age of 11, I began to realize it was the Jewish family who instilled in me singing from the heart, Armstrong recalled. They encouraged me to carry on. So that's why Louis Armstrong wore the Star of David.
It was a really, really, really moving story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now we are truly honored to have with us Donald Harrison, 2022 NEA Jazz Master, the most prestigious award given in the United States to jazz musicians and advocates. He will be joining Greg and Aryeh for a conversation exploring blues and jazz as a wisdom tradition. Gentlemen, please begin.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, Mr. Harrison. Thank you so much for being with us. It really is a pleasure and an honor. And just so our audience will have a sense of who they're listening to, yes, Mr. Donald Harrison is a 2022 NEA Jazz Master. He's also connected to jazz royalty. Donald Harrison played with people like Roy Haynes, who played with Charlie Parker and Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk, and he's a link in that chain. And it really is a privilege and an honor to have him with us. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Harrison.
Well, thank you for having me on this, as part of this great conversation. It's truly an honor and a great undertaking that you are doing for humanity.
Thank you very much. So my first question, Mr. Harrison, when we were speaking recently, you mentioned how important it was to you that you grew up in a city like New Orleans, which was just so full of music, and that you also grew up with musicians around you and in your family, and you were influenced by them. Could you please tell us a little bit about how much of your musical personality, how much of your artistic personality was shaped by where you grew up and your influences?
Yeah, well, I grew up here in New Orleans, and we know that this is one of the root contributors to the music of the world. I grew up going to what they call second line functions with the brass bands, the same way that Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet did his youth. Later on, I started playing in the bands. And I also grew up in a culture that comes out of Congo Square, because my father was a big chief. So I had both of those. So I was able to be like Sidney Bechet. He linked up Congo Square and other early jazz artists. I'm a modern jazz artist who was also linked up with the music from Congo Square and the traditional music. So I know the connections to the music from being on the inside of both of those cultures. Then at home, I heard all types of music. My parents played things from the UNESCO series, music from the Philippines, classical music, music from Broadway, jazz music. So music from Cuba, music from everywhere. And they put all of those things inside of me. So
wow.
I always thought of music as being everything. I never thought that you had to separate a certain sound from another sound. I always thought they were connected. And over time, I found a lot of those connections. So I'm just very happy.
Yeah, and
I have the roots inside of me, and then those roots are called from roots to infinity now. That you can take these ideas and go to the furthest corners of the universe.
I'm sure.
But still be grounded in the firmament of the music.
Yes, and that experience of universality is in your music, is expressed through your attempt to bring people together, and your love of and openness to different genres, and your willingness to listen to all kinds of music. That said, it's still important to you to be grounded in the blues tradition and jazz history. Why is it important to be grounded in the blues tradition and jazz history?
Well, there's a lot of ideas in music, but the blues is what I call, and a lot of the older musicians I was around, they call it one of the cornerstones of the music. So to have that in your sound, you have to be around it, and maybe you have to grow up in it. Mm-hmm. But if you listen to Charlie Parker, he's a blues player. If you listen to Sidney Bechet, he's a blues player. If you listen to Louis Armstrong, they're all blues artists. That's all part of what they do. John Coltrane, mm-hmm. Miles Davis used to say, "I'm just tooting the blues." So, you know, to master something, you have to have all the components. Mm-hmm. So since blues is a component, you have to go and deal with it. But it was natural for me, I think. I just enhanced it by being around and learning from a lot of people who are masters of the genre.
And with learning with all of these masters, if I can ask you one more question, please. What is some of the most important wisdom, musical wisdom and life wisdom, that you've learned from the jazz masters?
I learned to be true to yourself, the main lesson. Mm-hmm. And I learned that they were inclusive. The greatest ones were inclusive. Mm-hmm. And I came up with a statement, to be exclusive, you have to be inclusive. The more you add to who you are, mm-hmm. it shapes a very exclusive sound. Mm-hmm. And if you look at a person like Charlie Parker, you never saw him put down another artist, mm-hmm. or John Coltrane, or Sidney Bechet. And that's one of the things I loved about those guys. And if you read about Charlie Parker, they say he was very encouraging to everyone. Mm-hmm. So, and he was very inclusive in his style of music, mm-hmm. and the way he played. Everything he heard, he added to the sound of music. Mm-hmm. So those are the ideals that I try to uphold in what I do.
And you uphold
the beauty in everybody, and to be inclusive. Mm-hmm. And another idea that I have is, if the music comes from the people, then they will understand it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you put down Second Line or put down Louis Armstrong, you know, then maybe you have a different idea about the music. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a song at 19 called New York Second Line, where I merged the sound of the second line into a modern jazz context, right, for what I was listening to in New York.
Well,
and at that time, even the New Orleans musicians didn't get it. But now, you know, guys are dealing with that sound. So that's the part about following your path. The people who may not understand something initially, if it has some feeling from the heart that's true, then you turn them around and make them, you know, what Mr. Murray was saying, they have to reevaluate themselves.
That's right.
So I think just me being true, mm-hmm. to who I am and what I love has turned a lot of musicians around. My friend Craig Handy has a band called Second Line Smith, that he's dealing with that sound. And he's from the Bay Area. So you see people, but it started initially with me having to fight, okay, even musicians, to say this is what I love. I came from the second line. Even musicians from New Orleans, I love the second line.
Right.
It's just part of me. It's just a natural thing.
That's right.
So you just have to, at every moment, just be yourself, but also do your work.
That's right. Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry that our time is so brief, and I can assure you that you are an authentic continuation of everything that you described. So thank you so much for coming, for being with us and talking with us. And now...
Thank you so much, Donald.
Now for a poetic interlude, Greg will read the overture and coda of a poem in honor of Albert Murray by artist, scholar, educator, memoirist, and cultural advocate Elizabeth Alexander, the president of the Mellon Foundation.
This excerpt features 2 parts of a 6-part poem by Elizabeth Alexander. We're going to read first from the overture, and it starts with a quote from Murray. Obviously, there is much to be said for the conscious cultivation and extension of taste, but there is also something to be said for the functional reaction to artistic design and honeysuckles as normal elements of human existence. Albert Murray. 3, 4. The ancestors are humming. The ancestors are humming. Write a poem, girl. Turn the volume up, they say. Loud talking, talking loud. On piano, someone plays a boogie-woogie run. Omni, Albert Murray. Omni, omni, Albert Murray. In my mind, and in his, I think, a painting is a poem. A tambourine, a hip shake, and train whistle, a guitar. Trains run north, south, home, their whistles howling. Afro, am, black and blue, blue, Afro blue, blue black, and blue, blow, blue. I can picture Bearden with his magazines and scissors. I can see guitar shapes, curves like watermelon rinds. Will I find names like True Blood and the shapes for my collage? Omni, Albert Murray. Omni, omni, Albert Murray. 6, coda. Omni, having unrestricted universal range. Coda, a concluding passage, well-proportioned clause. On piano, someone plays a boogie-woogie run. Omni, Albert Murray. Omni, omni, Albert Murray.
Thank you, Greg. Now, next to join us is Amiel Handelsman, a Fortune 50 executive coach. In 2018, he interviewed Greg extensively about Murray's work. Since then, he has immersed himself deeply in the work of Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray. He, Greg, and Greg's wonderful partner and wife, Jewel Kinch Thomas, are currently teaching a public course together, Stepping Up, Wrestling with America's Past, Reimagining Its Future, Healing Together. Welcome, Amiel.
Thank you. In today's world, a little bit of clear-eyed sense-making goes a long way. For me, this is the gift of Albert Murray's Omni-American vision, which I'm honored to discuss today. It helps us make sense of the riddles and contradictions of American history, culture, and democracy. My Omni-American journey is one not through time, but through interpretation. For within Murray's courageous critique and stunningly original imagination, I find answers to questions I've wrestled with for years. Let me tell you about 5 of them. 1, does being more Jewish make me less American? As a boy growing up in a Midwestern college town in the 70s and 80s, I went to great pains to hide my cultural identity. Although this partly was a family thing, how my parents felt about being Jewish, and partly internalized anti-Semitism, it also reflected a larger American tension. You can stick with your tribe, or you can give that all up and be an American. Now, Albert Murray says, not so fast. To him, the American character itself is a blend of multiple cultures that mutually influence each other. Not only can I be Jewish and American, but embracing both the particular and the universal is quintessentially American. In fact, the very way I experience being Jewish, what I eat, read, listen to, and laugh about, and even how I speak and walk, is influenced by the mosaic of cultures around me. And that brings me to two. When a so-called white Jewish guy listens to Earth, Wind, and Fire or Run DMC and really enjoys it, is he, quote, trying to be Black? For years, I would have said yes. No matter how genuine my love of the music, I'd get tripped up by that infamous question. Are you trying to be Black? Then along comes Murray saying to me, you're not being Black or fake. You're doing what Americans do, borrow and reinterpret each other's cultural forms. Plus, he might say, the people you borrow from themselves have taken others' art and riffed on it. I'm reminded of Run DMC taking Aerosmith's song Walk This Way and making it their own. 3, what's going on when people talk about white America or white culture? For years, these phrases felt off to me, but I didn't quite have an answer. Although history textbooks and popular culture have long excluded and distorted Black American experiences, talk of white America didn't seem to make things better. It's an act of one-upmanship, using blunt exaggeration to sound both morally superior and more real when it is neither. This was clear to me, but I didn't have a response. Once again, Murray provides one. Speaking of white culture isn't just dogmatic, it's false. In Murray's words, it, quote, concedes too much to the self-inflating estimates of others and capitulates too easily to a con game that Black Americans' ancestors never fell for. Here's why, he might say. There is no American history without Black American history. And there's no American culture without Black American culture. What a refreshingly obvious insight. 4, why do so many American Jews, and frankly, many Americans, feel ashamed and only ashamed of Israel, a country I love and have been to? Murray doesn't explore this question, but we can extrapolate an answer from him. The belief that Israel is inherently unjust due to the condition of Palestinians is different in content, but similar in worldview to the belief, increasingly common these days, that America is irredeemably racist. Both storylines contain important truths, yet are reductionistic and dehumanizing to all parties. So in one tale, Black Americans are only victims of history, white folks are only bad, and that's it. Harriet Tubman, never heard of her. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's that? So in the other tale, Palestinians are only victims, the Israeli government is only bad, and again, that's it. The 99,000 other things happening in the daily lives of Israelis and Palestinians don't exist. And the conflicted feelings that most Israelis have about the occupation and this simplistic critique of Israel, they don't matter either. Finally, this one I've wondered about a lot. Why do white nationalists keep coming back, or some might say, have never really gone away? The answers are complex, but Murray nails it when he points a finger at racial essentialism. White Southerners used the false notion of biological race to justify slavery. The Nazis borrowed this to justify the persecution of Jews that culminated in the Holocaust. White nationalists continue to use this false notion today, as do many anti-racists. If we want to combat racism and anti-Semitism together, we need to combat the very idea that there are Black, white, and Jewish genetic codes, which scientists will tell us just don't exist. So when someone treats me poorly, even brutally, based on how I look or sound, I have a choice. I could accept their premise of racial essentialism, yet argue all races are equal, or knock that wickedly false idea out with a 1-2 punch. Murray says, knock it out. Because once you realize race is a fallacy, racism and anti-Semitism don't stand a chance. As I said, a bit of clear-eyed sense-making goes a long way. That's the gift of Albert Murray's Omni-American vision.
Well, Amiel has obviously done his Omni-American homework, but many haven't read Murray's work. So to answer the question, why should I read Albert Murray? Let's welcome Murray biographer Matthew McKnight and women's studies scholar Marla Brettschneider. Mr. McKnight and Ms. Brettschneider, thank you so much for being with us. Ms. Brettschneider, would you like to begin our conversation?
Sure, thank you.
Go ahead.
What an incredible lineup. This has been so beautiful, and I so look forward to the rest. Thank you so much to everybody for bringing us to this day and for including me and the vision that brought us here. So Matthew, really the question for us for right now is, so Matthew is writing a biography of Albert Murray, and you know, as a political theorist who teaches all sorts of people, and Horace Kalin, a Jewish theorists who lived, political theorists who lived around the same time as Albert Murray. And Matthew and I had this interesting conversation about one day we should really think about putting them together, because there are so many crossovers in their thinking, but we don't think they work together at all. But that's not a scholarly, we didn't, you know, look into that, but that's our hunch. So Matthew, the real question right now is why this new biography, and why now, meaning in our current, again, incredibly difficult moment? Why and why now?
Sure. Thank you, Marla. And I want to also first say thank you to Aria and to Greg for inviting me and for putting together this wonderful conference. And actually, the name of the conference is probably the best place to start, to follow the cue of that phrase, the Omni-Americans. I think of Murray's works, that book is probably the one that has become the most popular nowadays, because it speaks to so many of the long-standing issues, cultural issues and differences that we're facing now, with related to forming one's own identity, to negotiating that identity with other people, to the more extreme side of things with violence and you know, racism, anti-Semitism, that kind of thing. And so while the Omni-Americans is justifiably an important work and one that speaks to our times, I'd like to approach your question of why should one be interested in Albert Murray through two other of his works from 1971 and 1973. The first is South to a Very Old Place, which was his 71, published in 71, sort of a memoir travelogue, kind of cross-genre, cross-form book. But I think it's important because it does place an intense focus on the importance of artistic form and the importance of form generally that had for Albert Murray, and that's one important lesson that we should take from it. Relatedly, from his 1973 book, The Hero and the Blues, we hear more, at least, about the concept of antagonistic cooperation, which was a phrase that Murray learned from the scholar Joseph Campbell. And it's basically, you know, the notion that any two opposing forces, that phrase antagonistic cooperation identifies the dynamics of that relationship, which are that in their opposition to one another, they're actually cooperating to bring the best out of each other. And, as Murray wrote in the Omni-Americans, without the dragon, there can be no dragon slayer. And so putting those two ideas together, the importance and the value of form, not only in art, but in life, and also antagonistic cooperation, I think you begin to see that antagonistic cooperation itself is a form, one that we can use to inform our lives in how we face day-to-day obstacles or even major life obstacles, but also one that, as Murray demonstrated, is important for art, for literary art, and for other genres. But I would also posit that it's an important form for community development, for societal development, and also for political movements, for community organizing. It really places the focus on, as in Murray's words, how to be heroic in life, how to overcome obstacles, and rise to the occasion, rise above the inevitable stuff that we all encounter in life.
Thank you so much. We definitely look forward to seeing what emerges from the work and from seeing how this event plays into your thinking over time. And well, it's already been lovely to be thinking about how the conversation that we had off screen last week, and how this will be productive for listeners and all the participants today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. McKnight and Ms. Bretschneider, for that really thought-provoking dialogue. We'll now wrap up the first day of our event with a special moment, the presentation of the first annual Albert Murray Award for Omni-American Excellence to Murray's greatest student, the world-renowned trumpeter and composer, Wynton Marsalis. But before we do that, let's watch a short video of him speaking about Albert Murray at the 92nd Street Y. Take a look.
What can I say about Mr. Murray? I first met him, I was 18. When you're coming from the post-civil rights black neighborhood, you thought anything that happened before 1967 was slavery. So just to get used to somebody using the word Negro was a stretch. I went to Al's apartment, 132nd Street, with Stanley Crouch. And it was a modest apartment, but it was not modest with books. Everywhere you turn, there were books. So I thought, man, this old dude has a lot of books. Then he started to talk. I can honestly tell you, I didn't understand. I understood words like a and the and but everything in between was a mystery. And sometimes he would stop and say, "Ain't that right, young blood?" I'd be like, he was assuming you had read all of Thomas Mann, Andre Malraux, almost all of Faulkner, and he referred judiciously to those books. The laws of thermonuclear dynamics, concept of entropy. We could go on and on. He would say at any time, go up there and get this book and turn to page 613. And you'll get that book and turn to page 613, and guess what will be on that page? Exactly what he was talking about. Go get this periodical from over here, and you had to always get it. Moselle, I can't talk about Al without talking about his wife, Moselle. She was a woman whose presence was elegance and grace itself. She was just, she gave him, she gave the whole home a feeling of something that you had heard about but probably had never experienced. She was always just deeply soulful. That's what should have been one of those definitions. Moselle, that's soul. I learned so much from him. I would go to his house all the time. I would sit up with him, I pull up a stool. Over the 30 years, or however long it was, that I had the opportunity to know him. We argued a lot, but it was always familial. He taught me so much. Above all, he was about excellence. He was about the down home, and he was about studying and working on things and about knowing. It comes down to that. Do you want to know about things? Albert Murray, thank you very much.
Wow. Okay, now to introduce Mr. Marsalis, I welcome entrepreneur and businessman Louis Jones, the literary executor of the Albert Murray Trust.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this very special occasion. It's an even greater privilege to be the presenter of this very special award to Wynton Marsalis. Wynton's comments speak volumes about the breadth and depth of Albert Murray. And they capture something else that Bob O'Meally also mentioned. It is that of the extended family and family by election. There are blood relations, to be sure. You don't have any control over those. But you do have family by election. You can choose. And of course, choice is a matter of taste. And Albert Murray had excellent taste. And so does Wynton Marsalis and Bob O'Meally, who are prescient enough to have selected Albert Murray as part of their extended family. And in turn, the great honor is for Al to have selected you to this very special group. I cannot think of anyone any more deserving of this inaugural award. Wynton's commitment to the orchestrated Blue Statement stands as a beacon and a gateway to our common humanity. I'd like to read the words that have been prepared for this award. The Jazz Leadership Project, American Sephardi Federation, and the Combat Antisemitism Movement are pleased to present the first annual Albert Murray Award for Omni-American excellence to world-renowned musician, composer, and Jazz at Lincoln Center artistic and managing director, Wynton Marsalis. The honor is given in recognition of Marsalis' lifetime body of work, exemplifying the principles found in Murray's classic books, The Omni-Americans, The Hero and the Blues, and Stomping the Blues. Murray extolled America's pluralistic and infinitely multicolored culture, while robustly critiquing racial essentialism and strongly emphasizing the power of culture over race. The award is bestowed on trailblazers in the collective effort to build a more harmonious future, free of racism, anti-Semitism, and by striking at the root of ideologies that foster division, manipulation, and hatred. Winton, congratulations.
Thank you so much. I now have the honor of inviting Mr. Marsalis to say a few words to accept his award. Mr. Marsalis, first of all, congratulations, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Louis, for your warm and very generous remarks. I'm deeply honored to be the first recipient of the Albert Murray Award for Omni-American Excellence. I'd like to thank the organizers of this event, the American Sephardi Federation, the Combat Antisemitism Movement, and the Jazz Leadership Project for bringing awareness to Albert Murray and his prolific and meaningful contributions. Special thanks also to Greg Thomas and Aria Tepper for their dedication to jazz and for working tirelessly to make this event a reality. At the moment, I've just finished a gig in France, and when you see this video, we will be in Switzerland playing another gig. I wish I could join all of you by video, and but please know that I deeply appreciate this honor, and I'm excited to see what the future of this award will be. Al Murray was such a profound and great man, and as Louis said, you could say Al adopted me. He used to say he was my intellectual grandfather, but then he just said, well, just your grandfather. He was my mentor, friend, family member. I learned so much from him, spent so much time in his home with his deeply soulful and engaging wife, Moselle, and she truly took care of me like I was her grandson. Al's body of work and thought expanded my conception of the possible, of the world and of the possible. Reading his books and engaging in countless conversations and arguments with him clarified my understanding of the role of the arts, and my understanding of the need to always search and to know. To be around Mr. Murray was to be around someone who had 70 years of engagement. One book may have clippings from a 1942 newspaper, and his library was formidable. It was deep, and it will pick any book and say, go pull that book off, or pull this off. Turn to page 73. We're going to talk about the laws of thermonuclear dynamics today, entropy, the tendency of things that go random. They will go from one thing to another. It's so appropriate that this award is named the Albert Murray Award for Omni-American Excellence, because he believed that the American experience at its finest was mulatto, and it was a hybrid experience. There was no such thing as a pure American. And he was all about excellence in studying, and about, of course, a down-home swing. He loved the whole issues of rights and responsibilities, and Mr. Murray was really most about context. He always said, get all these big anthologies and read them and learn, get the broadest outline and then focus it on the specifics. The first book Mr. Murray gave me to read was Thomas Mann's Joseph and His Brothers. Man, you can imagine this. So it's such a huge book. I said, well, so I read it. And I asked him, man, why did you have me read that? He said, because you have to know that a blessing is also a curse. And just the entire highlight of my time with him was he's such a man of such deep knowledge and caring and belief in democratic principles and of the durability of American democracy. I wish he was alive right now so I could just have some good down-home talks with him. But I urge each of you to read his books. Read him. The Omni-Americans, Black Experience in American Culture, The Hero and the Blues, South to a Very Old Place, my favorite, and Stomping the Blues. He was, thank you all so much. We are many. Let us also be one. Let's be unified in our embrace of humanism, cultural excellence, and democracy. Let us not be tribal. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winton Marsalis, and congratulations again on receiving this award that you've received today. Now, for closing remarks, we'll go to Sasha Roitman-Dratwa, Executive Director of the Combat Antisemitism Movement, one of the organizations without which this event would not have been possible. Sasha, welcome.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ari, and thank you, Greg, for this wonderful collaboration. Hello, everyone at home, and thank you for taking part in the launching event of the new Omni-American Future Movement. What you saw today and what you will see tomorrow is just the beginning of something big we are engaging to change our society for the better. I would like first to thank the co-hosting partner, the Jazz Leadership Project, the American Sephardi Federation, for making this program a reality. And thank you to all the speakers as well. Congratulations again to Wynton Marsalis or Albert Murray Award recipient. Today, we are coming together not to only celebrate the rich cultural heritage of the Jewish and Black Americans, but also to take an active and collective stance against racism and anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. Looking at our past, as a result of the Nazi propaganda and racist policy that specialized target the Jewish people, Jews were classified as a race, defined by hateful stereotype that dehumanized all Jews. 8 decades later, the Jewish community continued to be attacked by the same racist beliefs of the past that define us as a separate race from the rest of the humanity. The world needs to recognize the culturally, ethnically, and religiously diverse attributes of the Jewish people, rather than define us as a separate race by anti-Semitic terms. The multicultural Omni-American event served as the great gateway to change this narrative. Despite the Jewish people making up only 0.02% of the global population and only 2% of the United States population, Jews are constantly the most targeted religious group in America. Some people have forgotten about this dark reality facing Jews and even refuse to consider Jews as a minority. The first step to combat this all-age hatred is to address anti-Semitism in the American context, home to the world's second largest Jewish population. The Black and the Jewish American communities have historically stood against racism and anti-Semitism together, but in recent years, this relationship has become fraught at times. We envision an Omni-American future together through the celebration of Black and Jewish American culture in the struggle against racism and anti-Semitism. The Nazis banned jazz music because they believed it was racially impure, but jazz is the fabric that connects our souls and deepens the bonds between different cultural groups through a shared love of music. Welcome to the beginning of the Omni-American future, my friends.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you for joining us on the first day of Combating Racism and Antisemitism, Shaping an Omni-American Future. We hope you've been infused with motivation to join the Omni-American movement and do your part in fighting racism and antisemitism and making the world a better place. Partner organizations that helped make this event possible include the JCC Association of North America, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, Lantos Foundation, National Jazz Museum, Free Black Thought, Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and Jazzmobile, among others. Remember, if you missed anything, you'll get an email recap, and a recording of the full event will be available at event.omniamerican.org, as well as on CAM's social media channels. And please come back tomorrow for the can't-miss second day of our event, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll feature more jazz stories, including an account by Lauren Schoenberg of Benny Goodman's relationship with legendary Black American jazz musicians Lionel Hampton and Teddy Wilson, a dialogue with legendary scholar of African American and Semitic studies, Professor Ephraim Isaac. Commentaries on Albert Murray's body of work by Murray scholar Paul Devlin, Rabbi Daniel Buskila, and author and philosopher Nick Jankel, classical composer Dan Asia, writers and editors Thomas Chatterton Williams, Jonathan Silver, John Wood Jr., and philosopher, psychologist, and educator Zach Stein, and a conversation between Chef Andrew Zimmern and author and psychologist Pamela Paresky, and more. The recipient of the first annual Omni-American Youth Award will also be announced. Let's conclude our first day with a rousing musical number. Itamar, take it away.
Thank you.